So good afternoon and happy New Year 2025. We are just 10 days from Dictator on day one, and our hearts go out to everyone in Southern California dealing with catastrophic wildfires. And I got to tell you, already 2025 is not really inspiring a lot of hope, but hey, what else are we going to do but keep fighting for what's right and support and love one another? If you're joining us today, please put your name in the chat and let us know what brings you here. It's been way too long, Rage Friday fam, and I'm glad that we're back and acting as Arizona's voice for the separation of church and state. Next week, we will be speaking with Elle Hardy, author of Beyond Belief, How Pentecostal Christianity is Taking Over the World. That sounds adequately ragey, so I'm sure you're going to be excited for that. I also wanted to share, I don't know if you can have seen this, but we just got some new shirts in. We'll have them for our in-person events. It says, you got to keep them separated. A little wall between the Capitol building and the church, because that's what should happen, but of course it doesn't. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure Lindsay's dropping links right now. But for today, we are speaking with Blake Chastain. Blake is the host of the podcast, Exvangelical, amazing podcast, writer of the newsletter, the Post-Evangelical Post, and co-founder of Irreverent Media Group, a podcast collective and content network that highlights diverse voices doing work for post-evangelical audiences. In 2016, he started the hashtag Exvangelical, coining what would become a common term for a person who has left evangelical Christianity. Chastain's work and advocacy have been featured in publications such as the New York Times, Newsweek, Vice, and the New Republic. He lives in Illinois with his wife and daughter. Now, you don't have to share this if you don't want to, Blake, but what part of Illinois are you coming from?
I'm in the Chicago area.
Okay, yeah, I'm from, it's really a farm town, but some people actually commute there. It is small northwest suburbs, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Small town, small minds. I left and
Yeah.
came here, and I never looked back. So one question that I wasn't able to ask you because of my technical difficulties is, would you like the questions to come as they come in, or would you like to just wait until the end?
I've got probably about 15 minutes of just some comments and a couple of excerpts from the book, and then happy to maybe then just give the rest of the time to discussion, if that works.
That's great. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, turn it over to you, and like I said, I will monitor the chat, and just go ahead and take it away, Blake. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. And I'm actually going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be trying to use a teleprompter app. So hopefully that'll go smoothly. But thank you very much for having me, and thank you to Secular Arizona for the invitation. I'm really humbled to be speaking with you today and deeply encouraged by your organization's work. I truly believe that all people committed to pluralism and democracy, regardless of creed or lack thereof, must find ways to work together and bridge our networks in order to reject Christian nationalism in all contexts. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Blake Chastain. I was born and raised in the Midwest, and I still make my home in Illinois. I was raised evangelical and was deeply committed to it. At the ripe old age of 17, I felt a call to ministry and selected a Christian college to start that journey, but life had other plans. 9/11 occurred during the first full week of school, and I was appalled by the excitement and support for the invasion of Iraq, among other things. This began what we now call my deconstruction journey, even though I would continue to try and exist in evangelical spaces until 2014. In 2016, I started the Exvangelical podcast to explore why I, my wife, and so many of the people we went to school with had left evangelical churches and belief. In my book, Exvangelical and Beyond, I write about the history of American white evangelicalism, its success in building an alternate lifestyle complete with its own media, churches, schools, and businesses, and the counterpublic that has grown up online in the last decade or so via hashtags like Exvangelical, which I started, and others like Church2, started by Emily Joy Allison and River Posh. I want to do a little bit of reading from the book, if that's all right. One passage from the introduction and another from one of the later chapters on the need for new metaphors. Then I'll close with some final thoughts and then open it up for questions. So here is the portion from the introduction. When I first began using the word exvangelical, I never imagined the ways it would spread. By now, it has far exceeded the bounds of my humble podcast and suffused the broader lexicon. It has appeared in publications from the New York Times to Christianity Today. It has a Wikipedia entry. At the time of this writing, the hashtag has 1.7 billion impressions on TikTok, a platform I hardly ever post to. I think the term has become so widespread because it's a useful part of crucial conversations about faith, politics, and culture. But its wide reach also means it has accumulated cruft and all manner of unintended associations. I can no longer control the various ways that people interpret exvangelical, if I ever could, but I can tell you how I understand it and why I think it helps us have much needed discussions. First, exvangelical denotes someone who was formerly evangelical, but is not evangelical at present. By definition, this person has a familiarity with evangelical teaching and evangelical culture, which makes their repudiation of evangelicalism more authoritative. They're not mere naysayers, they know what they're talking about. Second, the term acknowledges personal autonomy because although it does define past experience, it does not define a singular present theological perspective. Evangelicals can be atheists, agnostics, or Christians in more progressive denominations. They can be mystics or Episcopalians, anything in between, or nothing at all. In that sense, the word makes space for people to explore their own convictions and acknowledges that beliefs change over time. It doesn't try to dictate what people who leave evangelicalism should believe. Third, the term exvangelical does not require you to commit to it. You can use it as you see fit or not. If you fully transition to another belief system that you affirm, then by all means, you can discard the term once it no longer suits you. Some people find value in delineating the various terms they use to understand and express themselves, while others find the use of labels pedantic and exhausting. I embrace the reality that people will use the subtleties of language, including exvangelical, to express themselves as they desire. Finally, and above all else, the very existence of a term with a self-evident meaning helps evangelicals know they aren't alone. Some people will personally identify with it while others won't, but anyone deconstructing their faith who hears exvangelical will at the very least know that there are enough other people like them out there that someone had to invent a word for it. I hope this book will continue that project. But before I explain what this book is, I want to explain what it isn't. Though it contains some details about my life, it's not a memoir or exploration of personal spiritual beliefs. Given the nature of the term exvangelical, people are often curious as to whether I still identify as a Christian. And uh, um, I consider that to be one of the least interesting questions. Um, Sorry, I lost my place here. I apologize. Um, I consider "Are you still a Christian?" to be the least interesting of all the questions people ask those who leave a high demand religion like white evangelicalism. If you'll be distracted by speculating, I can tell you that at the time of this writing, I have no particular compulsion to declare Jesus Christ or anyone as Lord. I also do not have a particular desire to declare God dead or non existent. To me, a statement of non belief feels as binding as a statement of belief. If you must put me in a theological box, I find resonance with Paul Tillich's vision of God as the ground of being, but have very little faith and even less evidence that God can or does work through miraculous means. If this admission makes you sad, it has at times made me sad too, but I would rather be honest with you and with myself. That being said, my Christian past will always play a role in shaping my view and experience of the world, and I consider my present agnosticism to be an open invitation to potential future faiths. As Wendell Berry once wrote, um, uh, and as Christianity is my native religion, for better or worse. We were born to it. We began to learn about it before we became conscious. It is, whatever we think of it, an intimate belonging of our being. It informs our consciousness, our language, and our dreams. And like Barry, for better or worse, I can never deny that. However, while I remain open to broader questions of philosophy, theology, and divinity, I'm not bothered if you don't. This book is not meant to advocate for any particular belief system, and I have no agenda to convert you to my view of the world. Over the course of my life, I've had many faith and identity shifts, and while leaving evangelicalism was the largest, it was not the last. I'll keep changing throughout my life, for better or worse, and I imagine you will too. Your spirituality is your own to do with and cultivate with whatever tools edify you and do not harm others, with or without God. The only spiritual advice I'd give you is to try to understand the past even as you do not let it dictate your present or future, and live your life in widening circles that liberate you and others. Whether this advice has resonance with your understanding of Christianity or any other form of belief, that's up to you to affirm or deny. Additionally, this book does not seek to reform the white evangelical church or convince evangelicals to listen to reason. As I'll, ex- as I'll show, many people have tried to achieve these goals for many decades, including in the past me, and none have succeeded for reasons that I'll explore in depth. If some open minded evangelical is inspired to read these words, I welcome them to do so, but that's not who I'm writing for. My primary audience is the people who've been brave enough to leave the church, no matter where they are on their journey, as well as anyone else who wants to understand evangelicalism's outsized role in the current events of the United States. So, then what does this book aim to do? First, I want to explain for insiders and outsiders alike how the evangelical church went radical. My, my goal is not to comprehensively document every little detail of the evangelical movement. That would be a different book, and in fact, several books. Rather, I use history in the same way journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones describes it. History revealed the building blocks of the world I now inhabited, explaining how communities, institutions, and relationships came to be. It provided the key to decode all that I saw around me. With that in mind, my goal is to illustrate how the modern evangelical movement's inextricability from power, capitalism, and whiteness is the result of close to 200 years of history. I will highlight some of the events and developments that brought us to the crisis point we've reached today, in which evangelicalism functions less as a religious movement than as a Christian nationalist one, with a dangerous amount of control over American politics. This brings me to my second aim. I want to explain the exvangelical movement that isn't content to leave quietly and instead chooses to speak back and to oppose the church. How did it arise and how did it spread? What are its goals and how does it differ from the progressive activist movements within the church that preceded it? How has the internet helped and hindered this largely online phenomenon? Does it stand a chance against the money and power of the evangelical church? As the originator of the Exvangelical hashtag and as someone who has interviewed evangelicals of every stripe on my podcast, I hope to offer some unique insight into these questions. Lastly, to the extent that it's possible, I want to consider the future. As I write these words, the 2024 U.S. presidential election is approaching. The future is uncertain, but Christian nationalism will continue to play a role in shaping it. How can we change the ways we talk and think about the evangelical church, as well as its proponents and opponents, in a manner that serves us as individuals and a society? How can we practice democratic, humanist values in a country struggling to resist theocracy? My work in this arena has largely existed in the digital realm up to this point, but now I intend to take full advantage of the medium of the book. For as digital humanities scholar Andrew Piper writes, books are totems against ceaseless activity, tools for securing the somatic calm that is the beginning of all careful, but also visionary thought. I believe that with a deeper understanding of our country's past and present religious history, we can start to hold accountable those who have wielded faith like a cudgel and offer comfort and understanding to those who have been harmed by the powerful and mighty. Now, much of my book does go into a lot of evangelical history, as well as uh, recounting a number of things about the development of the ex-evangelical counterpublic. But I actually want to, for this audience, I do want to share a portion from later in the book, and it's on a chapter about the need for new metaphors. In his book, White Too Long: The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity, Robert P. Jones highlights the work of researchers Michael O. Emerson and Christian Smith, which has found that white evangelicals have a restricted moral vision based on a viewing of every problem and every solution through the lens of personal sinfulness. Emerson and Smith write, absent from evangelical accounts is the idea that poor relationships might be shaped by social structures such as laws, the ways institutions operate, or forms of segregation. Walking away from evangelicalism means losing not just a certain form of spirituality, but also a certain set of ethics. And so again, we must look outside of evangelical tradition to make up for our inherited deficiencies, seeking ethics that honestly appraise the world and its systems rather than trying to cram it into the simplistic framework of sin. To do that, these ethics must account for rapid social and technological change. The steadfast evangelical commitment to never changing is not a virtue, but a vice, and one that is costing them and us dearly. It is not a good thing that Harry Emerson's Fosdick's description of the fundamentalists of his time in the 1920s applies just as well to the fundamentalists of the 2020s. By routinely refusing to revisit what they have deemed orthodoxy, they have reduced themselves to circling the same issues again and again, methodically rejecting new information and reinforcing their worldview. Their commitment to remaining in the 1920s alienates and isolates them. It leads to a faith that stifles growth instead of encouraging it. But as Thich Nhat Hanh writes, our faith must be alive. It cannot be just a set of rigid beliefs and notions. Our faith must evolve every day and bring us joy, peace, freedom, and love. Stubbornness is not a fruit of the Spirit. Because of evangelical stubbornness, everyone in the country is stuck having the same cultural conversations again and again throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. We cannot keep allowing such intransigence to wind back the clock in our churches, our government, or our daily lives. It is here that I think the work of philosophers like Shannon Valor can help us. Valor's book, Technology and the Virtues, a philosophical guide to a future worth wanting, provides an in-depth comparative study of Aristotelian, Buddhist, and Confucian ethics in an effort to adapt those traditions to today's complex moral environment. As the name suggests, Valor's book is mindful of the role technology has had in shaping, changing, and complicating society in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. She acknowledges that the techno-utopian vision envisioned by mid-20th century futurists and sold to us by technology firms has not come to pass. Instead, we have a fractured yet connected, information-saturated environment and enormous global problems, like climate change and income inequality. Yet technological progress does not slow. In retrospect, society may not have been ready for the seismic and sudden changes wrought by the mobile computing era, and it may not be ready for the digital paradigms based on AI or virtual and augmented reality that seems to be on the horizon. But there's no use in ignoring a reality. As Valor writes, while we face a future that remains cloaked in a technosocial fog, this does not mean that we go into it unprepared or ill-equipped, especially when it comes to matters of ethical life. She takes it as a given that human social practices, including our moral practices, have always been intertwined with our technologies, and that in this sense, the 21st century CE is not so different from the 5th century BCE. We already have what we need to face this moment in history, because we have always had it. Valor proposes 12 techno-moral virtues: honesty, self-control, humility, justice, courage, empathy, care, civility, flexibility, perspective, magnanimity, and techno-moral wisdom that can be adapted to various traditions. This adaptability is key because it leaves room for a virtue ethic that is pluralistic, open to more than one mode of expression of human flourishing, and malleable, adapted to the needs and affordances of the present human condition and environment, and thus represents humanity's best chance to cope and even thrive in the midst of great uncertainties and vicissitudes of technosocial life that lie ahead. This moral vision is diametrically opposed to evangelical presuppositionalism, which, true to its name, presupposes certain axioms, like the existence of God or the inerrancy of the Bible, and rejects out of hand any arguments that don't comport with them. Whereas presuppositionalism is rigid and inflexible, virtue ethics, such as those proposed by Valor, are pliant and flexible. A presuppositionalist would argue that this is tantamount to unmoored moral relativism that can justify anything, theft, murder, whatever. What they'd fail to see is that by orienting itself around flourishing rather than a set of arbitrary presuppositions, virtue ethics allows practitioners to be moral while also being mindful of the complexity of the world. Presuppositionalism is simply not up to the task. Questions about the use of technology in politics, media, religion, and culture remain open-ended and consequential. What safeguards exist to prevent another weaponization of data like that of Cambridge Analytica? How will local pastors who struggled to address the influence of QAnon in their congregations be able to manage a more literal difference in worldview if their congregants can place a Christian nationalist augmented reality filter to the entire world via something like smart glasses? Will these technologies and the media they transmit deepen existing divisions, or will they enable new connections across these divides? Today's platforms have not been immune to weaponization by authoritarian or fascist groups and governments, which breeds little confidence that they will develop the buffers necessary to resist such efforts in tomorrow's media. In order to face the personal and social challenges ahead of us, we will have to grow beyond our fundamentalisms. We will also have to grow beyond our transitional identities and practices. What is next for us as individuals and as a people? How do we move forward with our own personal practices? And how do we work to structure our society in a way that is resistant to the most virulent and violent strains of Christian nationalism? In my estimation, we must look far and wide for the answers to these questions, and we must not be afraid if our answers fail in part or in total. The only true failure is a failure to try. So I do hope that you all will pick up my book in whichever format you choose to learn more about how ex-evangelicals and others have sought to speak back and take action against Christian extremism, and how we might imagine new futures while also pursuing our own wholeness and healing. I wrote this book in the hopes that we might avoid another Trump presidency, but that's not what happened. In the election's aftermath, I've started to wonder how we can best respond to the various crises we face, and I'm excited to talk to you all about what you envision as well. In my mind, there are needs for multiple communities working in tandem and understanding that not everyone can be bridge builders to every single group. A bridge only connects 2 points after all. If one point connected everything, it would be a hub and it would center one community above all, which is the same sort of thinking that got us here. I believe that religious nuns and secular people are undervalued in the fight against Christian supremacy and nationalism, and that those of us who navigate from one community to another, as I have, and likely many of you have a tremendous value to offer. So in closing, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share with you. And if you want to follow my work, you did see those links in there earlier as well. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer some questions.
The first question I'm going to take comes from Andrew, and it comes from the Q&A, and he asks, do you have a working definition of spirit or spirituality?
Do I personally? No. I mean, I sort of see in my mind the way I think of spirituality is just personal practices. So oftentimes, even if you see it in like say a bookstore section, you see religion and spirituality. I think of religion as a more collective action where there may be shared beliefs, and then spirituality can be something that is highly individual and idiosyncratic.
For me, I think about nature, like the
Hmm.
closest I come to feeling a spiritual experience is going somewhere where I don't have cell service and just being out in nature. So that's my way of interpreting my own spirituality. But I know that when other people talk about their spirituality, it could be something very different.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely, I mean, I think probably just in the same way that there's not like a singular consensus on what religion means, even amongst academics that study it, spirituality has the same sort of foibles.
There's another question coming in from Phil, and he asks, do we have any data showing how many ex-evangelicals are still Christian, how many have converted to other faiths, and how many are now atheists, etc.?
I don't know of like a demonstrative singular study that has really started to delve into this. And my book was definitely more of a qualitative book rather than a quantitative one. I do know that some of those studies have started that, but and there have been some books by like I believe Non-Verts by Stephen Bullivant was one. And then there's another one by Ryan Burge, who's a political scientist. He also is a, a pastor. So and I'm not as familiar with his methodology. But I do know that there are concurrent efforts, but I don't know that there has been like a conclusive one that focuses on people who have left and then moved to all of these various traditions. But it is sort of, there is definitely something similar to a dispersal or a diaspora, some continuing into a different strain of religion and others moving into secularism or other forms of Christianity.
Hmm. And like you, I've noticed quite a few of the ex-evangelicals who have spoken with us in the past also hesitate to, identify their own, spiritual or religious journey because
Hmm.
I think, I don't know, and because I wasn't raised that way, but I just wonder too, um, if, and you can only speak to your experience, but do you feel like you're, not wanting to talk about your spirituality is because you constantly had to talk about it as an evangelical?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm actually fairly comfortable talking about it. I just now, like, if I was going to get really pedantic about it, I would say I'm an agnostic Christian humanist, and so whether it's a matter of whether you know whether God exists it's just not that interesting of a question to me at this moment in my life. But I also can't deny as I mentioned in that Wendell Berry quote, I can't deny the impact that it had on my formation. So that's why, I sort of include that, even though I don't any, currently practice any aspect of Christian practice
Hmm.
personally. So, but everybody, based on their own journey, some people may have significant traumas around things. So being in a religious space for some people is more triggering than others, or it's just not a place where they're going to feel comfortable. And sometimes, if you're speaking to an explicitly Christian audience, that they don't if they don't have a similar trauma, they don't understand that.
Hmm.
Um, but other audiences totally get it, you know? So, that to me, like the only sort of things that are where and to whom you were born are seem to be like the only things that are absolutely static about our identity. Everything else is sort of up to what we do.
And yeah, I feel like, well, we put out a survey last fall for our members. Maybe it was during the summer, but and we really were very inclusive about like, okay, describe your spirituality, religion. And we gave so many, probably almost a dozen different descriptors. But
Hmm.
now, because we left it open-ended, because we know our members, and it was, like many people have multiple, there's an intersexuality to how they or intersectionalism. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But they're, about how we think of ourselves. Like I often describe myself as an atheist humanist,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I heard you use three separate descriptors. So I think that for a lot of us, those of you who have maybe felt pigeonholed into having to have this, very dogmatic, ideology, maybe it's,
Hmm.
I like the idea of painting myself with a broader brush instead of
Right.
such a narrow vision of myself.
Right. Yeah, and I do think like for people that, came of age in an era where, you know, what you had to do is write a Twitter profile with like four adjectives. Some of us are like are accustomed to that, but then, one thing that I've noticed younger people do on TikTok and other profiles, they'll say like no niche, and because they don't want to be pigeonholed. And so
Mhm.
that sort of desire, I think, also shifts with the times, and it's not strictly generational. It's just something that depending on what the desire is. But some people really want to know, and like to me, it's like it's one of the like how did this affect you is more interesting to me than what do you believe about it to this day. But I know it's important to people. So and so it's something that to at least engage on.
Excuse me. There's a comment here from George. Because I think George maybe feels differently here, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, George, but he says, I believe that religion is the biggest delusion ever perpetrated upon mankind. I cannot accept agnosticism. Anyone can invent anything that cannot be disproven. Do you have any comments about that statement?
Um, Not that I I don't know that my agnosticism is something for you to accept or not. I mean, it's a personal stance. So so I don't know that I have much comment with regard to that. I see from my own experience. I mean, I've heard the diametric position a lot.
Yeah,
From evangelicals who insist on the existence of God. Um, and really where my agnosticism comes from is a place of like epistemic humility. It's like I don't know what I don't know, and whether something can be verified by the senses uh or whatever else. I also took courses, um, even things like Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions informs my agnosticism because that that book and the way he writes about how paradigm shifts happen by building around anomalies in a particular worldview or set of assumptions. To me, like there's just a lot I don't know, and I do think that there are things to learn from religious practices, even if you don't take them literally. Um, and also there are ways in which to connect with other people, even if you don't believe that they in the supernatural aspects of religion. So um, that's just my sort of personal approach.
yeah, fair. Let's see. Here's a question. Mark asks, Phoenix-based Turning Point USA, boy, aren't we lucky that they're right in our backyard,
Oh yeah.
are working to recruit mainline churches to radical evangelical churches, aided by many people leaving Christian churches, as I did many years ago. How can this be reversed if possible? And what do you think about this?
How do I think it's possible? I think they are far more adept at. I think they are far more adept at media. Turning Point USA is also very organized. They are very. Uh, Charlie Kirk is part of the Council for National Policy. Like I don't know if you all have spoken to Ann Nelson or read Shadow Network, but the Council for National Policy um, is uh, a group that has a lot of influence in media and politics, uh, in particular conservative media, and Charlie Kirk is has been brought into that fold. And they even, if you look at the way TPUSA faith functions, a lot of their things work really well when you look at like a marketing flywheel, because they will have they will have events that oftentimes are free of charge, or like very accessible, which progressive Christian groups do not have the funds to enable. And then they get you plugged in with people, and then they'll send you materials, and then they'll get you in their communications chains, and then they'll encourage you to start your own chapters, and then it continues, and they're very good at that community building, and it's because they've had evangelical communities have over a century of this practice. I mean, in my book, I look at the fundamentals, which is where we get the term fundamentalists from. That was a print endeavor that was sent to 300,000 pastors in the early 20th century that created this community of conservative pastors, and then that led to the next thing. And so TPUSA is works in a similar way, and um, a lot of mainline or progressive denominations may not be aware of the way in which um, their congregants are also being messaged to through media, through that offer things that are not necessarily uh, conducive to their own theologies. So they they are very, very good at what they do, and there being a counter voice, I think, is important, both from within other religious institutions that have a vested interest in that, as well as groups like yours that are specifically secular and say this type of uh, uh, enforcement and imputing this type of religious vision on governance is inappropriate and has no place in American life. And they should find ways to counteract that. But TPOSA is regrettably very successful at what they do.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah, unfortunately. Let's see. This one comes from James. The growth of evangelism has little to do with Jesus's teaching. I see similarities in other extremist movements, Islam, Hindu, etc. Could this be a response to overpopulation?
Overpopulation. Um, I
I
don't
think
know.
there's like there's definitely like a faction of atheists um who focus a lot of their time on overpopulation. So in working with some of those individuals, I can kind of see where this question is coming from. I mean,
Okay.
like you brought up you brought up um, class inequality. And if there is overpopulation, there's going to be probably even more class inequality. So I just wonder if maybe it's just part of the bigger, the bigger puzzle that we're all dealing with right now in the
Mhm.
world. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, within some within some circles, that whether or not they self-identify as evangelical, they share a lot of common culture and beliefs with evangelicals. Say like the Quiverful movement. They those are people that are specifically and explicitly interested in having as many children as possible, and that's where you see. Why am I blanking on the documentary's name? The documentary that was on Amazon Prime earlier about the Duggars. Um, uh, I'm blanking on it in the moment. I apologize. Um, but it was a shiny happy people. Thank you very very much in the chat. Um, that is a very good look at that world. So evangelicalism is often not convinced by overpopulation. So I don't know whether it's a like a particular response to that. Um, evangelical Modern evangelicalism is much closer to fundamentalism. I mean, if there would be American religious historians that would bicker about terminology, because there is a history of evangelicalism earlier on into the 19th century that was not so dogmatically fundamentalist, things like the holiness movement. But then later on, fundamentalism and these very entrenched beliefs become come more to the center of those cultures, those churches, those beliefs. It's really and even so, like there are a number of things about those traditions that aside from being religious traditions that your audience would reject, that even so there are social beliefs and things like that that would not be acceptable
Mhm.
um, to someone with like modern progressive ethics. But I don't. I personally don't know whether overpopulation is a concern, but what evangelicalism does very well is uh, it does activate fear and anxiety through any manner of things, whether it's the doctrine of sin or the teaching of the second coming, and it's very good at mobilizing people to be afraid and to believe that things will always get worse. Instead of believing in a future that might be better than the past, it's always going to get worse.
Yeah. So much of this is driven by fear, which makes sense when you come out the womb and you're told you must be afraid because you're a sinner. There's this creepy guy watching your every single move. The world is out to get you, and the secular world is filled with like invisible demons that none of us can see. Of
hmm
course, you're fearful.
hmm
Um,
Right. And then you have secular pronatalists like Elon Musk who is obsessed with the birth rate, but he's, into effective altruism and all these other sort of secular uh not secular theologies, but these secular philosophies that still have a like this teleological obsession with populating the stars and all this other stuff and discounting all of the present issues that we have on our planet right now.
mhm. Yeah, and the rest of us just have to sit there and like watch while all of these terrible decisions are made and where
hmm
things are just ignored. Um,
hmm
Andrew asks, how big a driver is race and misogyny to evangelical belief versus following the teachings of Jesus?
Oh, um, I would say like uh, in very much part of the thesis of my book is that evangelicalism is driven by capital whiteness and power. Um, and so a number of the stories that you hear from people who've left evangelicalism, whether they use a term like exvangelical or not, is that they left because of experiences of racism or misogyny, or both within evangelical circles. Whether that is a whether that is a conscious motivator depends on sort of your place within evangelicalism. There are some places where it is, uh, if not overt, very close to overt. That those are the things that they care about, and there are plenty of examples historically. There's a book called The Myth of Colorblind Christians that really looks at sort of post civil rights era as well as the civil rights era, and looking at how Christians upheld white supremacy. But every expression of Christianity in America and mainlines uh, are not exempt from this. Are rooted in and tainted by white supremacy. So it's the soil that cultivated them. So even if it's not something that they're conscious of, it is something that does has informed and shaped things. There are other fantastic books that address it directly. Anthea Butler's White Evangelical Racism is a great book on that. There's another book, I believe, by Jesse Curtis called "The Bible Told Them So" about white supremacy um, and white Christians during the civil rights movement. in their opposition to the civil rights movement. But then you can also find counterexamples of progressive Christians that have fought for those things too. But the conservative expression of evangelicalism is by and large resistant to even talking about the history of these things. And I had hoped, that over the last decade that folks would at least be more open to those things. But now we're seeing the social norms, and like even in the latest from this week of Meta's changes around what's allowed on their platforms, shifting more into being antagonistic to those discussions.
Mm-hmm. And this next question coming from Andrew kind of goes along with that. Does your book discuss specific harm committed by evangelicism uh, or evangelicalism, particularly regarding LGBTQ plus and reproductive rights?
Yes, it does. It does touch on that, and it does, but it's not explicitly it's not explicitly about that. What I do try to do is show a survey, and especially what I throughout my book, how I tried to structure that is that I tried to look at a number of attempted reform movements within evangelicalism in the 20th century and moving forward that really tried internally, people internally who wanted uh, evangelicalism, in particular white evangelicalism, to do better and to improve on matters of race and gender uh, and and sexuality and try to move those things forward. But what we see time and again is that these traditions and the people that hold authority and power routinely reject those attempted reforms. And so then people would leave. They would disengage, they would disaffiliate, and for the longest time, those exoduses would be quiet and singular. But now, thanks to the internet, we can uh, th those things that were invisible are now more visible because people are talking about them. So um, there are places in which people will talk about these things, whether it's specific to a queer person or a person of color, sharing their stories of abuse or survival or however they frame their story. Um, those types of things are being written about, being talked about online. There's an upcoming book that is being edited by, I believe, Luke Wilson called Shame, Sex, Attraction, which is about survivors of conversion therapy. There's another anthology, Empty the Pews, that also looks at that. Then there's other memoirs like um, Andre Henry wrote all the white friends I couldn't keep, about leaving white evangelical spaces. So we are seeing this becoming a broader uh, a a broader literary genre, and just these types of memoirs. Explicitly queer ones include Heretic um, by Gina Cadlick, um, and others. Like that's the wonderful thing is that all of these things continue to be published and continue to be written and spoken about online and in print and elsewhere.
One thing that I stumbled upon, speaking of, reading about people's exodus or whatever, their dissatisfaction. I was working with a local journalist, and she was looking into a specific church here in the Valley. And we decided to take a look at their Google and Yelp reviews. If you have some time, it's kind of interesting actually to go to some of these very conservative fundamentalist churches and read the reviews. Now, many of them are like glowing, this I saw God, my third eye opened, whatever, but there are so many really nefarious stories on those online forums. And some of them are really quite alarming. Um, One thing that I really liked that you said was that about how um, the cultural beliefs will continue to be reinforced because of their unwillingness to change. And I just watched a board meeting in Peoria, Arizona last night, where it's pretty clear that these folks are very rooted in their beliefs and their ideologies, and they are not going to change. And in fact, they're going to bring their rigid beliefs and ideologies to their public school community. It was a flurry last night of bad policies that they want to discuss in the coming meetings. And it could, very, very quickly and easily, I would say, damage the district. And in the same district, there was a board member. Oh gosh, they didn't like the science curriculum because they wanted creationism to be taught. And the woman, actually, the board member is no longer there, actually made a statement: Science is constant; it never changes because it comes from God." And it was, yeah, like, and that is the mindset, that coupled with the fact that literally when they see me, they think that I am like either Satan or possessed by demons. I am somehow trying to harm their children. It couldn't be further from the truth, but like it's really hard to uncouple those ideas and to even have a conversation with these kinds of people.
Right, right. Yes. And that's one of the that's one of the more difficult things about being formed in spaces like this, uh and the danger of of fundamentalist sort of thinking is that it's extremely rigid, and generally a lot of times it's not always something that you can educate your way out of. Some people, education is part of what we might call deconstruction. These that learning new things can be really, really powerful, but sometimes it's only when someone sees or experiences the consequences of being on the outside of the community that they're part of an in group that really rattles them and makes them open to changing their mind. But there's this. I attended this event last month. It was a post-election sort of debrief type thing, and one of the comments that really stuck with me is that you can mass radicalize people, but you can't mass de-radicalize them. And I don't really know what to do with that yet. I'm really sort of sitting with that, but um, in that statement, it it resonates because even though there are these broad patterns of things that get people to question fundamentalist things, especially within my context of evangelical belief, whether it's purity culture or being anti LGBTQ or racist or misogynist, it's still up to exactly how those things happen, and what exactly is the individual catalyst is always specific to that person's life experience.
Hmm. Um, I recently I've been listening to a podcast called Behind the Bastards. I'm
Hmm.
I'm on an older episode right now that they did before the election, but it's drawing parallels between journalism in Italy and Germany during the rise of both Mussolini and Hitler, and also the American attitudes. And it was either the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune back in the 20s, or back in the 30s it would have been, saying that maybe fascism is what can rescue us from the Great Depression. And boy, that Mussolini sure is a charismatic guy, and he's like akin to a Hollywood movie star. And then they drew parallels on what is happening right now with our media. And I'll tell you, it's really alarming. Like, I just feel like there's a huge portion of people in this country who never took a history class or something, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The de-emphasis of a liberal arts education over the last several decades is showing its consequences.
Really is. I feel like we could probably talk about all of these topics for a very long time. Yes, Rachel Maddow's prequel is a great podcast, and I believe it's a book as well. I have some, I think his name is Robert. Oh God, I can't remember, but he's so great. He's a journalist and historian, and I don't get any money for plugging them, but it is really, it for me, it helps to go behind the bastards and
Hmm.
figure out what made them and figure out what contributed to them. Now, can I stop the train that's already off the tracks? Probably not, but at the very least, I'll have a deeper understanding, when they put me into a camp somewhere, I guess. Um, yeah. No, it's not Robert Wright either. Robert Anglin maybe is his name. Anyway, great podcaster. Highly recommend it, as well as If Books Could Kill. And of course,
Hmm.
the podcast Exvangelical. It is a really good podcast. You explore some great topics, and I encourage everybody to pick up Blake's book for sure. But before we go, Blake, as we are 10 days away from this inauguration, what gives you hope?
Um, I am still choosing to be very, very encouraged and inspired by groups like yours, as well as any other local organizing. I find hope that, the days after the election, for those of whether from the liberal to leftist sort of spectrum, whatever term you use, that there was a bit of resignation and obviously anger and lots of frustrated feelings, but that there was then uh, there was then a lot of interest in local organizing and looking not just to ensuring that your direct family and friends are okay, but that your local areas uh, and I am encouraged by that because I'm in a blue state, that sort of thing. But there are other places that are more precarious and um, that we continue to try to build networks and both locally and at larger scales. And that to me is encouraging, because that means that we've not like given up into some sort of nihilism or hopelessness. I do think that hope is a choice, and so that is something that I am encouraged to see, that not, that collectively it's not that we're giving up, even though this fight is harder and longer term than we want it to be.
Yep, and we're all exhausted. So, hope is a choice, people. Hope is a choice. So hopefully you all go out this weekend and choose some hope. Thank you, Blake, for giving us hope today. And again, make sure that you check out the Exvangelical podcast and pick up, oh gosh, I had it, the name of the book. Say the name of the book real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Exvangelical and Beyond: How American Christianity Went Radical and the Movement That's Fighting Back.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I hope you have a great weekend, Blake, and I hope the rest of you have a great weekend. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Bye, everybody. Take care.